The objective of this video tutorial is to animate the 20 objects in this group, which we have named Spinner, by showing each of them at an interval of 80 milliseconds. We only want 7 objects to be visible at any one time in our animation, and we will set the spinner to make 5 revolutions and then stop. We will use this button, called Start Spinner, as our trigger to fire the animation. The animation of a group of objects generally does not require that the individual objects be named. As you can see here, we have named our group Spinner, but the individual objects within the group have been left unnamed. It is important, though, that each individual object be layered in the order in which we want them to appear in the animation. And you can see that we've done that. All right? When the page loads, the state of our spinner should be that the group is visible, but the individual objects within the group are hidden. In order to accomplish this, we're going to use pgTBObjSet onLoad page for the group Spinner to hide the individual objects within the group. So pgTBObjSet, name of self is the group Spinner. We're going to manipulate the visible property and set it to false. And then over here we're going to set parse group to true, which tells the function to manipulate each individual object within the group rather than the whole group as a single entity. Now remember, we also want the spinner to make just 5 revolutions. So in order to accomplish that, we need to set a variable. In this case, we set the variable counter and set its value to 0. That's the initial value for our counter. But when the page loads, just in case that counter is not set to 0, we're going to make sure that it's set to 0 right at this point when the page loads. That way we don't have to worry about it again. Right? So now let's go ahead and export our page and make sure that our spinner objects indeed are hidden. All right, we've exported our page. Let's take a look in the browser. You notice all our objects are hidden at this point. So that's the effect we were trying to achieve up until this point. So now let's configure our button, the Start Spinner button, that will inevitably start the spinner animation. We will program the button to send a trigger event to the spinner group. Then we will disable the Start Spinner button until the animation has completed. We've already coded this for you, and here's what it looks like. You notice on click for Start Spinner, we trigger the group Spinner and then set the enabled of this button to false. That's all we need to do for our Start Spinner button. The rest of our actions will be placed on the spinner group itself for the onTrigger event, because that's the event that's going to be sent to our group. The first thing we need to do is to check the value of our counter, because we don't want to allow the event to process if the counter is already at 5 revolutions. So if counter equals 5, then what we want to do is reset the counter value back down to 0. We want to enable our button so that we can restart this whole process. Our whole animation can be restarted from our button. And then we want to break out of this trigger action so that the only way to restart the animation is by clicking the Start Spinner button. The next thing we need to do is we need to find out what is the visible state of the first object in our spinner group, because what we want to do is we want to begin to show and hide each of the objects in the spinner group at our 80 millisecond interval. But we need a benchmark. We need to know what is the state of the first object in the group in order for this to work. Well, in order to find that out, we're going to use a function, a PowerPac function called getGroupObjects. And what this is an object collection function. It's going to take a look at the spinner group and collect all the objects and put each of their references in an index of an array variable called TMP, which we have already defined right here as a global variable. So now each of our objects within the spinner group is put in the TMP variable. We just need to check one of them to find out what the visible state is. So let's check one of them by running another PowerPac function called pgTBObjSet. The first object in our spinner group is always going to be at the first index of our array variable, or index 0. And the property that we want to get is visible. And we're going to store that in the same variable, TMP, so that now TMP is either true or false. When the page first loads, this value, of course, will be false because all of our objects have been hidden. Now let's go ahead and begin our animation by running pgTBObjSet. We target again the spinner. We're manipulating the visible of each object in the group. We're setting it to the value of TMP, but it's already false when the page loads. We need the opposite of that to begin showing the spinner. So in this case, we want the opposite, or not TMP, which in this case will convert to the value of true. The delay is 80 milliseconds. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to progressively parse the group. So we enter the string progressive, which tells the function to set each object in the group to true after 80 milliseconds. So each object will show, it'll wait 80 milliseconds and show the next one, and progressively right around the clock in our circle. Then what we want to do is re-trigger this object after all of the objects have been shown. So again, we go right back to pgTBObjSet, and in this case we're going to target again our spinner, but this time instead of the visible property, we're going to send the trigger back to itself and create a loop. The value for a trigger is nothing because it doesn't receive a value, and the delay in this case has to be after all the objects have been shown. So we're showing them at 80 milliseconds. There are 20 of them, so in this case 80 times 20 is 1600 milliseconds. So now our object will re-trigger itself after 80 milliseconds and start the spinner all over again. But since we only want 7 of the objects to be visible at any one time, what we need to do is to create a sort of double animation going on at the same time. So we're going to use a standard ToolBook delay here to wait for the 7 objects to begin showing. If 7 objects show at 80 milliseconds, then we have to wait 560 milliseconds before we refire this animation to start hiding the objects behind them. So let's go ahead now and run pgTBObjSet after 560 milliseconds. And in this case, we're targeting again the spinner, the property, visible. The value is going to be TMP this time. Remember, TMP originally is false, and that's exactly what we want to do. We want to start hiding the spinner elements that are showing progressively. And we also want these to be running at 80 milliseconds, and we want the function to do so progressively. So we enter progressive for our parse group value. All right? Now the final task is we need to increment our counter for each revolution. So we'll enter counter +1. When it gets to 5, it'll reset itself, enable our start spinner button, and break out of this whole loop action. So that's all we need to do in order to create our spinner animation. Let's watch it in our exported version. Here we go. So our project has been exported. You notice all of our objects are hidden. When I click the spinner, there they show they go around once, they go around twice, 3 times, 4 times, and 5 times and stop. And the spinner button is re-enabled. I can start the process again, and it goes around 5 times, and it should stop. And there it goes. pgTBObjSet allows you to be very creative in building animations, and the resulting animations are cross-browser and cross-device compatible.